A friend of mine in Russia recently asked me whether theology can be considered as a science. And I think that lurking behind that question is another question, and that is, should theology really have a place as a discipline or as a field of study at a modern university? Well, if we have a narrow definition of science, then no, we would not normally think of theology as a science. In other words, if by science we mean the method of observing empirical phenomena and the hypotheses that we construct based on those material and efficient causes, what we normally call hard or natural science, then no, theology probably doesn't count. But if we use a more traditional, a broader definition of science, one based on the Latin word scientia, then science is simply a way of knowing by means of causes or general principles. And so it includes any body of knowledge. If we limit what we know and what we pursue as knowledge to science narrowly defined, then we have greatly restricted what counts as knowledge, not only in a university, but also in our own everyday, ordinary lives. For there are objects of knowledge and ways of knowing that go beyond what we can see through a microscope or a telescope. For instance, mathematical concepts or the idea of a perfect circle are well known quite apart from empirical observation. You can't put those things under a microscope. But are they not real? The assumption behind theology is that God is real and that He can be known. If we insist that only something empirically demonstrable is a proper object of knowledge, then we'd better be prepared to cast aside some of our cherished everyday beliefs that we take for granted. For example, my belief in the consciousness of other people, or my belief that my spouse loves me, or my belief about what I had for breakfast yesterday morning. None of this can be demonstrably proved or examined empirically. If we insist that hard science is the only science that counts, then Socrates would have no place at a modern university. He spent his time asking questions like, what is morality? What is love? What is happiness? What is the good life? These are questions that shaped the history of human thought. And without these and other similar questions, there would be no place in the university for not only theology, but departments of art, departments of philosophy, and so on. On a purely objective level, in some ways, theology is doing the same thing that hard science does, but just from a different perspective and with different questions. Both scientific and theological methods are analogous to one another. They are both attempts to explain the phenomena that we see with models and hypotheses that then get tested and explained and become then the basis for other hypotheses and theories. There is in some ways a bottom-up approach with both ways of knowing. Also, the basis of inductive science, which enjoys a place of preeminence in the university, a privilege that often goes unquestioned, is itself questionable on many fronts. Natural science should realize and accept the circularity in its own epistemology and the limits to its method. Properly speaking, in the realm of hard science, we believe something that could turn out to be false. Natural science could use a little more epistemic humility. Yes, science, like any other body of knowledge, is based on a number of first principles that cannot be proved externally or by reason alone. Any scientist that is not aware of this indisputable fact needs to do a little more digging. Given all the unproven and unprovable assumptions behind hard science, Should we therefore dispense with it? Well, I wouldn't think so. One result of the marginalization of theology is the attempt to fill that void with hard science. In the modern age, science has been pushed beyond the limits of its own method and become the new, unquestioned authority. This is what some people call scientism. That is, people promoting hard science as the explanation for everything and the solution to all human questions. Look, natural science deals pretty well with efficient and material causes. That is, causes that are tangible. And that's about it. It has made great strides in these areas, but it cannot tell us about the why. It's not an explanation for everything. Those who think that hard science explains everything usually hold to the philosophical worldview that's called materialism or naturalism. That is, that all that exists is physical matter. Now think about that for a second. The assertion that physics explains everything because only physical things exist. And we know that only physical things exist because everything that exists is explained by physics. This is deeply irrational and circular, and it leaves unexplained the most basic phenomena of human experience. For instance, consciousness, mental processes like intention and will, being and the source of contingent beings, our sense of morality and of the good and the beautiful, our sense of divinity. Hard science, by definition, cannot account for any of these things. Because we cannot put intention or being or the good under a microscope, does that mean that these real phenomena are not worth deep contemplation and research? Why should that be the case? The university, as we know it, began with theology. The queen of the sciences, it was called. Just as it was philosophical theology that was at the heart of Plato's ancient academy. From the ancient through the early modern period, it was theology and philosophy that inspired what we think of as science. That is, the search for more knowledge about the universe, reflected in the modern disciplines of natural science. Theology as an academic discipline or way of knowing, a science, deals with a different set of questions than does hard science. If, as a human race, we decide that there's nothing worth knowing that is not tangible, then there should be no place in the university or in learned discourse of any kind for theology or a whole host of other topics. And if we decide that, we would be worse off.